Okay, thank you so much, Thomas and Kevin. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a real pleasure for me to be here. As Kevin has said, I'm Executive Director of the ISSC. I've been doing this for 7 years. My background is in science and technology studies, primarily science policy studies. But I think when it comes to the question of qualifications, what I'm best qualified at is to do an international job. I come from South Africa. I also hold German citizenship. I live in the Netherlands. I work in France. And my job is to travel the world, including to Stockholm. And I'm delighted to be here. Okay, so what I would like to do today is to reflect on the issue of integrated science from a fairly, not from a research perspective. This comes from years of working as a science policy maker, the work that I've been doing at the ISSC, discussions with scientists from different parts of the world, and I'm really delighted. I hope that this creates a kind of framework for discussion, and I'm really looking forward to the presentation by Fanny on taking this to the level of practice, because I think that's where we have to get serious about integration and walk the talk of integration. So I want to also, in my presentation, focus very briefly on a new initiative that I think gives us the institutional opportunity to do exactly that, to get serious about it, and then draw a few conclusions. But start off with the policy context at the international science and technology policy landscape level, and what grand challenges for science does that context set? So, I don't have to convince you that we're living in extraordinary times of converging planetary and social crises, where in complex socio-ecological systems we can no longer see problems of climate to poverty, inequality, and other environmental problems as discrete, competing problems, but that these are interconnected in complex and dynamic ways. And hence, the kind of overarching challenge that we're facing is to bring together a number of imperatives now, from planetary stewardship to social equality, equity, and to including the safeguarding of human well-being and human security in its broadest sense of access to rights, to voice, to equity. So this is the global reality that we face. At the same time, within the science system, we are in a time of persistent funding pressures in science systems all over the world. The economic crisis has had a severe impact on science. And at the same time, we are living in a time of unprecedented pressures on science to be relevant, to make a difference, to solve real-world problems. Science has always had to defend its relevance, but I think the degree to which communities are now looking towards science, policy communities and others, to help make a difference is new and unprecedented. Why is that? The idea of science needing to provide better understandings of this complex dynamic system and the problems it brings with it, to accelerate the production of relevant knowledge. There's a big sense of urgency in the community of us. We need to make a difference in the coming decade. To be more effective at meeting user requirements, to speak more directly to society, to inform livable and just solutions, to shape deliberate and deliberative policy making, so policy making that makes a difference, that leads us to processes of transformation, but that are at the same time inclusive of various voices, so democratizing those processes. And that means that the way in which we've been practicing research, business as usual, is no longer an option. And I think if you know, from the kinds of engagements that we have between ICSU, the International Council for Science, the natural science counterpart, and ISSC, in trying to set up initiatives like Future Earth, which I'll come back to, this really is the mood of the times. Business as usual is not an option. We need to reflect critically on how we do our science, how we organize it, and find new ways of producing knowledge and making sure that that knowledge works. We need transformative knowledge, just simply knowledge that can help shift the transformative agenda, the kind of deep processes of social transformation that the grand challenge of sustainability requires of us. And the way in which we've operationalized this, thinking back onto the science system, is to say we need integrated science. And what I will try to do is to go through how we understand integration, the various dimensions, what challenges that raises, and in posing definitions of integration and raising challenges, hopefully make the case for why integrated science might also be more fit to produce transformative knowledge than the kinds of science and scientific practices we are dealing with and have at our disposal at the moment. So, integrated science, which ISSC and ICSU in the context of Future Earth have been working on defining, clarifying what exactly is it that we mean. And we've come up with 3 dimensions of integration that need to be looked at critically. The first is clearly what we talk about as multi, inter, and cross-disciplinarity. This is integration across scientific disciplines and across scientific fields. Secondly, science that works globally, science that is truly globally representative. And then thirdly, what a lot of people call transdisciplinarity. I know there are various ways of interpreting that, but we've chosen to put transdisciplinarity in the dimension of science working not for society, but with society. So that shift in the rhetoric of what it means to work with societal stakeholders, not just policymakers. So when we look at integration across disciplines, we're talking here about taking collaboration between different sciences and scholarly fields to a deeper, more meaningful, constructive form than what we've seen to date. What is that? It does not mean, okay, so I'll get back to what it does mean, but it does not mean unifying disciplines into one. It does not mean the loss of disciplinary identity or the loss of diverse perspectives, approaches, or methodologies. It does mean being confident in one's own disciplinary base, however, remaining open to other ways of viewing and studying the world, open to asking new, different kinds of questions, and open to working together on the basis of mutual respect. So, a sense of openness that comes from a disciplinary base in which one is confident is key to how we understand integration. And I think there's a degree of threat when one starts talking about integrating the sciences, particularly across fields, about losing the kind of knowledge base and the importance of disciplinary science in the integrated research effort. Integration across science does not mean, and this is where the gripe of the social sciences comes out, it does not mean that scholars from the social and human sciences are asked to join in attempts at addressing problems when it's essentially when those problems have been framed and solutions have been found from other fields of science. This is typically an area where, and we still see this today, we still see applications and proposals where natural science and physical science interpretation of integration is about saying, and we need the social sciences to come and address the ethics of an issue and help us do stuff like technology assessment and selling of solutions that come from another scientific field to the wider public. That's typically what happens, but it does sometimes happen the other way around as well, that what we're seeing now as social scientists in interpretations of integration is for them to come up with the framing of problems, come up with some ideas of policy solutions, and then hope to bring the natural scientists on board in making those more palatable. It does therefore mean the joint reciprocal framing, and then design, execution, and application of research. I think what's new and what's key is the issue of joint framing, that this is a collaborative effort right from the start, from when you define the research agenda, from when you define the research problem, that there needs to be dialogue and interaction between the fields. What are the challenges to this deeper level of collaboration, more meaningful collaboration across disciplines and scientific fields? It's not surprising to say that if we look at our institutions, that disciplines do dominate. They dominate academic training systems, they dominate our funding mechanisms, and they dominate the way in which we manage career possibilities, career advancement incentives, including publication and evaluation systems. And of course, let me say that that creates some tensions when we go to the level of practice, because, as I've said, we want integration is also based on the disciplinary strengths. So that creates tensions in terms of understanding how do we address this at an institutional level. But the different fields also have different research traditions, cultures, and languages. It is true that the social sciences are wordier, and they believe in things like the social construction of knowledge, and that can be difficult when you start interacting with natural sciences. And you do find reciprocal accusations of naivete and knowledge gaps, whether it is about the social world or the physical world. These are cultural language issues between the fields that do make it difficult to stimulate and promote this kind of dialogue. Integrated work requires time. It involves building relations of trust in what is a fundamentally competitive environment, particularly with the funding pressures on that environment. And it's a form of collaboration that you can't impose on people. It can't be forced from the top down. It requires the time and ideally should be based on bottom-up emergent processes in which people have the time to build relations of trust in order to take this collaboration forward on the basis of equality and respect. And the reality is, and this is where, I'm really we do need to go to the level of practice, but I do believe that if you look at science systems across the world, there are good examples, but on the whole, we don't have a great track record on which to draw. I was horrified recently looking through old ISSC publications to come across a book published more than 40 years ago, in which it was an ISSC-organized conference on global environmental change. It was called differently in those days, but the same problems essentially. And it just opens up with the call for we need interdisciplinarity between the natural and the social sciences. And this is, you kind of think, when are we going to get it right? Okay, so we don't have a great track record and we're running out of time. So let's look at, I've talked a little bit already about the cultural issues between the natural and social sciences, but more specifically when it comes to integrating, and when I talk about social sciences, I should clarify that I'm also including behavioral, economic sciences, and we shouldn't forget the humanities as well. But in the field of global environmental change research, I think those who've been working in this area will recognize that particularly at the international level, this is a field that has operated essentially as a closed network and that does not speak to the range of social science and humanities concerns and interests. At the same time, we need to understand that when you're looking at the social sciences as a community, you're looking at possibly several types of communities. There's a big debate in the social sciences about, are we talking about one social science or many social sciences? And that kind of hierarchy of disciplines and approaches you see reflected in the social science community that has worked on issues of environmental change, but also on sustainability. So bibliometric analyses, no matter how biased we know those can be, still tell an interesting story about the number of publications that come from the social science community that touch on the environment, sustainability, climate change, for example, come from geography and economics. And then there's a radical lag in the mainstream disciplines. And within the social sciences themselves, I think we must recognize that the status of research, which is oriented towards solving concrete problems, the kind of research that we, where the pressure for relevance is on us now, versus theoretical, curiosity-driven research, there's still a big status debate within the social science community. Some people do feel that doing applied, solutions-oriented, policy-relevant research is not necessarily as good for their careers as doing theoretical, curiosity-driven research. These are issues in the social sciences that we grapple with. The social sciences really have insufficient advancement incentives to get involved in global environmental change. If you look at what are the international journals that are career-making journals for social sciences, they are disciplinary-based, and the environment does not feature highly in those disciplinary-based mechanisms. And then I think, and this for us at the ISSC is really one of the issues we're trying to pick up on very strongly, is that a lot of relevant and excellent social science research remains invisible to the environment. What we've been, and what programs like the International Human Dimensions Program, which is co-sponsored by the ISSC, ICSU, and the United Nations University, and was set up in the 90s, what programs like this have done very well is they've shown that there is a place for the social sciences in the environment. But what we've been less good at is showing that there is a place for the environment in the social sciences, so bringing the environment to the heart of the social sciences. And the fact that that's not visible, that a lot of excellent and relevant social science is not visible, there are a number of reasons for that. It goes back to how research is framed and by whom, what is perceived as being useful knowledge, and what is classified as falling outside of the intellectual or academic agenda. And those are issues of power within the science system that I think we need to be aware of. Now I want to do a detour because I'm talking about the need for bringing together natural and social sciences. And I want to raise here the issue of, well, why the social sciences? Within this talk about integration, I think it's fair to say that the focus has fallen most sharply on the need to bring in social science knowledge. And I think there is real recognition today that social science knowledge is indispensable knowledge, that we're not going to solve the environmental and sustainability problems without good social science. So there's a call for more social science and better social science. But that means we have to articulate what kind of social science, what is it that the social sciences bring uniquely to solving, to solutions-oriented, integrated science on sustainability. And I think that the social science community itself has not adequately articulated the answers to these fundamental questions. These are questions that the ISSC, with the support of CEDA, set out to address. About 2 years ago, we've been working on this through processes of global consultation, visioning, and agenda setting in collaboration with other organizations like ICSU and others. And we've come up with a report and a framework on a report called The Transformative Cornerstones of Social Science Research. These cornerstones are lenses or tools or mechanisms rooted in the social sciences that are intended to allow us to understand global environmental change as social processes that are embedded in social systems, both past and present. They are tools to help us rethink the shape and the course of those systems. And we call them transformative because these cornerstones raise issues which, if we can find answers to, if we can tackle those issues, they provide us with tools to contest some of the processes and to deliver transformative knowledge. So typically, and please don't worry about how these have been, these topics, concrete topics, have been put together in boxes, but this is just to show that when you get scientists in a room, when you do these kinds of visioning and agenda setting exercises, and particularly when you get social scientists in the room, what's in the boxes will change. If you ask what are the concrete priority issues that we need to address, you'll get a different list depending on who's in the room. What we've noticed, though, is that regardless of which concrete issues are being addressed, if there are social scientists in the room, they will start raising questions that we think have to be asked regardless of what the concrete agenda is. So whether you're dealing with issues of water, land, energy, ecosystems, climate change, whatever, there is a consistent set of questions which, if we want to deliver more equitable, sustainable solutions, we have to battle with these questions, and those are what we call the transformative social science cornerstones. There is a report which you can, on all the cornerstones, which you can download from our website, so I'll just go through them very, very quickly. The first one are questions about complexity. And social sciences ask questions that help us understand the ramifications, the full ramifications of saying we live in a complex socio-ecological system. What exactly are the multiple stresses and drivers of processes like climate change? How are climate change, poverty, and other social crises connected? What is the nature of the connections? It's also about looking at how these problems take on different meanings and different experiences and responses in different contexts. Contextual complexity adds to the problem that we're facing and the uncertainty of that problem. Historical drivers are also part of the complexity story. So social scientists are good at unpacking these dynamics. The consequences are about coming to grips with what social scientists do is able to come to grips with the actual and unfolding consequences, impacts of global change on real people's lives in different contexts. That is work for social sciences. But also under consequences is to understand the consequences of our existing policy solutions and sometimes, more importantly, the unintended consequences of making policy in one sector for policies and actions in another sector. So it's looking at, linked to complexity, it's looking at the interdependence of people's vulnerability to a range of processes that are not rooted either in nature or society, but that are dynamically connected. A huge set of questions for the social sciences, big demand also when you talk with natural scientists, I think, is the expectations that social sciences must deliver knowledge on how we change people's behavior. But change is not just about individual behavior and attitudes, it's about changing social practices. It's about understanding how social practices are rooted in social systems and processes and that create unsustainable lifestyles we face today. But change is also about asking whose idea of change and what direction, who gets to decide, and when does talk about change become politically and culturally unacceptable? So there are a lot of fundamental social science questions to be asked around issues of change. Fourth one is about going into the inner dimension. How do what kind of worldviews, hopes, desires, beliefs, value systems underlie how we understand global change, how we live it, how we experience it, and how we respond to it? this is important I mean, these are all connected, but this really, looking at that inner dimension, I think broadens the idea of what is part of the system. We often talk about ecological, social, political, cultural, economic, but the psychological is there as well. Responsibilities is about foregrounding normative agendas, also in our science. Social science questions about intergenerational justice, about ethics, what does it mean to bring, to safeguard an ethical approach to policy making on global change, what are the consequences of that, and finally a huge set of social science questions about governance and decision making. This is about social sciences needing to understand the political process, really coming to grips with how do we secure political will, where are new political coalitions going to come from, what is the role of science in the policy process, but equally one might ask what is the role of emotions in the policy process. At what level, what kinds of structures and institutions do we ideally need at different levels from local to global? Those kinds of social science questions. What I like about this framework, and what I think as we've been talking with people across the world about it, what works for people is that this shows that whether you're doing theoretical or empirical, basic or applied social science, no matter what field you're in, including philosophy, history, etc., you have something to say. This is about showing that environmental issues, sustainability, is part of social science. It's a fundamental aspect of social science. So it's bringing environment into the heart of the social sciences. So that's my plug for the social sciences and why the integration of social and natural sciences is so important, because I think the social sciences bring fundamental, transformative knowledge to bear on the issues we face. But a second dimension of of integration of research, and one I think that we take for granted and we shouldn't, is the notion of integration of global knowledge. When we talk about this, we typically focus on the need to build research capacity in those countries with less well-resourced knowledge production systems, but building truly globally representative international scientific effort goes beyond building capacity in the global south. It's building capacity everywhere for doing international collaboration on the basis of equality and mutual respect, recognizing that there is also excellent capacity in those areas where we are doing capacity building. This means including multiple socio-geographic agendas, perspectives, approaches, methods, and incorporating the episteme of the majority world in the global knowledge repository. And it means, it's a touchy issue, but it means avoiding the imposition of agendas, methods, approaches from one part of the world on those of the other part of the world. The challenges to this clearly have to do with underlying knowledge divides. It clearly has to do with the fact that there is capacity to be built not only in terms of individual training, but also at the institutional and systemic level. There is a discrepancy, there are divides in resources, critical mass, access to data, etc., etc. But the other challenge is that you have historically institutionalized monopolies, hegemonic systems and practices. We just sometimes don't see the excellence of the other. And those are blind spots that, particularly coming from the north, we need to examine quite critically. Let me just go back and say on that often what we do is we also burden people from the global south, those few that we might have in our networks and know deliver excellent science. And they take on an enormous burden of work, and we need to find ways of spreading that if we want to really promote truly integrated global knowledge production. Then the big one, integration with society, what we call transdisciplinarity. We've defined this as bringing various practitioners, policy decision makers, as well as actors from civil society and the private sector together in what, these are quite fashionable words now, co-design, co-production of knowledge, and I would add co-delivery of knowledge, policy and practice. What does this mean? This means that we have to recognize that there are multiple sources of relevant expertise, of which science is one. And at different times, all these actors, including scientists, are both producers and users of knowledge. It's not about just scientists who produce and just users who take up the science. This is about building what people like David Tabara and others call open networked knowledge arenas for global sustainability. Arenas that traverse the boundaries between science and society and span the gap between knowledge and action, and that involve, between those stakeholders that come into the arena, forms of collaborative learning and problem solving. Okay, so in practice, this means we have to move beyond our instrumental interpretations of relevance, the language of impact and uptake. It's a linear language in which what David Gustin calls science proposes, society disposes, and in which policymakers, practitioners, and other stakeholders are essentially absent or treated as passive recipients. You know, you can fill their heads with knowledge. It's that kind of language we need to move beyond now. And it also means that we need to move beyond organizing our agendas and practices according to second-hand notions of what practitioners and policymakers might want and need from science. It means moving beyond dualistic mechanisms of production and use. A nice example here is recently UNESCO was asked to advise the UN Secretary General on how he should respond to some of the recommendations of the resilience report, and the decision was to set up a high-level scientific advisory committee for the UN Secretary General on sustainability. And I think we have to ask whether yet another science advisory mechanism is going to cut it. Is it going to make a difference? This, I think, is part of these are the kinds of issues we have to ask critically. It also means moving beyond relying that our research findings will eventually percolate like a coffee filter machine through the media and public debates and think tanks. We need to do something more proactive. And it means moving beyond dependence on the authority and visibility of our notable scientists. It was lovely, a real privilege to be able to interview Eleanor Ostrom for the Transformative Cornerstones work. And when we talked with her about how do we make our knowledge work, she said, well, getting a Nobel Prize helps. It does, but we can't rely on that. There are not enough of them. It also means that we have to, and I'm trying to provoke a little bit here, but we have to move beyond involving users in our management and advisory boards. That's not good enough either, to have them in the governance system. So co-production of knowledge goes way beyond that. And it means moving beyond the interaction with users as witnesses or contributors of data, making the point again that we're both producers and users of knowledge, but by seeing them only as the source of knowledge that we need to interpret ourselves, we essentially exclude their concerns and values and worldviews and deny them a voice in developing research that is compatible with their needs and aspirations. It means balancing diverse agendas and facilitating collective problem framing, that's the co-design issue, and then promoting the joint reciprocal design, execution and application of research, the co-delivery. And I think we must add there, as I say, the co-production, not just co-production of knowledge, but co-production of policy and practice. And it means that practically, I think, we have to find mechanisms to ensure regular and timely interaction It's not a case of when you get a research grant and they ask you how are you going to demonstrate policy relevance that you'll have a workshop for policymakers at the end. It's got to be interaction from the beginning, but that means ensuring transparency, having process facilitation skills, and ensuring that there is reflexive learning, both from scientists and the so-called users. The challenges of doing this: we don't have many mechanisms for fostering that level of serious engagement and regular interaction. But even when we do, I think this is really important, that we don't necessarily think about the making available the necessary motivation and resources for non-academics to participate in those processes. I've been in many meetings where we've had leaders of squatter settlements, leaders of private sector companies in meetings, and the main question is, what the hell are we doing here? What do you want from us? And then some people have stronger voices than others. So if you're going to bring people together in these kinds of co-design, co-production processes, you really need careful process skills, facilitation skills. So this is a point I've been making. We cannot be sure that those spaces will not be appropriated by more resourceful actors or reconstruct policy inequalities, power inequalities and imbalances. Researchers don't necessarily have the skills. It's not what we're trained to do, and they're not awarded for going to get those skills. And many of us still claim autonomy we don't want to have that kind of close interaction. We want to maintain the space to be critical of policy and to remain objective of the interests of stakeholders. Universities are not institutions that have worked for decades to keep the distance for those reasons of autonomy, etc., etc. The interface between policy and research is often tense. They have different timelines, different pressures and objectives. And we've got to accept that, especially in the social sciences, research does influence decisions, but rarely immediately. Some of the big issues, concepts that we work with today are social science-based concepts that we take as common sense. They come from social sciences that have been, it's decades of work that translates into common sense concepts today. So, that's the integration story. Those raise challenges of how we go about doing this. And I realize that I'm running out of time, but what I want to briefly share with you is that a new international initiative, which is being set up by an alliance of partners that brings together the ISSC, ICSU, a group of major funders across the world called the Belmont Forum, UNESCO, the United Nations University, UNEP, and the World Meteorological Organization. And Future Earth is, I think, an attempt at the international institutional level to give the scientific community a real opportunity to get it right. This is our chance, I think. So, it's been in design phase. There was a transition team that was appointed to do the initial design of the research strategy and institutional arrangements, and that transition team had to grapple with this notion of integration. How do we make that work? Where we're at the moment is the transition team has finished its report on what it should look like, what kinds of issues Future Earth will deal with, and we're implementing that now, and we hope that Future Earth will be fully operational by mid-2014. I'm not going to go into great detail here, but just to say that it is the outcome of an initiative that was started by ICSU, actually, to a visioning process to really come up with what are the critical research issues that we need to address in the coming 10 years. And ISSC was brought into that process. That visioning process started converging with what the Belmont Forum, the funders, were doing and visioning themselves. And at a joint meeting of the Belmont Forum, ICSU and ISSC in October 2010, there was a clear understanding that we're heading in the same direction towards the need for a single unified strategic framework, for an integrated framework. That's the alliance, and the integrated framework is now what we know as Future Earth. It's a 10-year initiative on research for global sustainability. And that title, I know, Thomas, you could talk at length about this too. That title itself tells a story, because it's gone from Earth system science to all sorts of other, but really reflecting the communities coming together to come up even with a title that makes sense to both natural, social, human sciences. I'm not going to go into detail here, but Future Earth will be bringing together the existing global environmental change programs that you all know. IHDP, IGBP, and Diversitas will in fact merge into Future Earth, and WCRP will remain as a critical partner in Future Earth. It brings together in its scope what I said, the grand challenges, planetary stewardship on the one hand, social equity, sustainability, transformation on the other. And here's the integration story. This is what Future Earth wants to accomplish. High quality, internationally collaborative, inter and cross-disciplinary research which is solutions-oriented, co-designed, co-produced in partnership with the users of research. So it creates, this is the integrated science playing ground, if you will. Bringing together those communities, and finally what I want to show you about Future Earth, just as a nice example of how the transition team who've designed this have really grappled with taking integration seriously. So if you look at the proposed governance structure, which looks clumsy, and that's one of the challenges we face as we try and make a reality of integration, is the alliance itself. The partners that have come together to establish Future Earth are the co-sponsors. They are setting up an alliance forum, a multi-stakeholder alliance forum as a sounding board. Then you have for Future Earth itself a governing council which will not just involve scientists, but it will be multi-stakeholder. So the decisions about Future Earth will be made in a multi-stakeholder governing council, advised by scientists, but also by users in an engagement committee. And then the themes that have been identified are dynamic planet, global development, transition to sustainability, and again you'll see the attempt to speak to different communities. So conclusions. I think this stuff on integration really requires institutional innovations, and that's why I was showing you the governance system. It is a bit clumsy, but we need to be innovative about how we do this at institutional level. We need to, for example, part of the innovation is how do we interpret and implement the idea of academic autonomy, not as a right, which is how we've understood it, but as a notion of collaborative assurance for the public good. How do we mix, mobilize, manage multiple knowledge actors and assets, defragment our research efforts, and better connect the scientific and funding landscapes? This challenges existing institutions, structures, and practices, also at universities, but also within funding organizations. It challenges what kind of research is supported, how it is supported, how it is organized, how it is reviewed, evaluated, and how researchers are trained. That's kind of a bland summary of a huge job. And I think it requires us to think carefully about what might be bridges. And by bridges, I would include, we do have some experience now of running inclusive agenda setting processes, and those need to be fostered. But we do need to think through what are innovative funding practices. How can we fund research in a way that makes it possible for the researchers to run the kinds of processes that is required to bring a multi-stakeholder group into co-designing and co-producing knowledge? And that just means we have to experiment as well to some extent. And it's not easy to find support and safe spaces for experimentation which might go wrong. So we need to create those safe spaces. And I think we need to think about how we can best use boundary individuals and organizations, and there are more and more of them, who help us make the links between science and society so that we are better able to work together. And finally, I think we need to understand integration as a social science research area in and of itself. You know, there is a real danger that everybody starts talking about integration as the new thing, and then we just assume that it delivers and makes knowledge work. We've got to understand in practice, does it do that? And are there better ways of doing integration, better than others, right? So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope I haven't gone over time.